I was just facing the wall the whole time.
Luke, I can give it up on you. You have no idea what happens.
Let's go. I mean, I will, but like, you're making it really
You got it. Yeah. I'm not gonna fall for that. All right, let's get started. Nate is gone tonight. He is not feeling well, so if you would like to send him a nice text real quick and just say get well soon, you are all welcome to do that at the same time. It'll make him feel all warm and special inside. So, but anyways, he's out. So I've got announcements. Two things for you. One, this coming Monday we have Hub, and that's going to be at our house. So make your plans for that Monday at 6. And then for the girls, you have a service project that you're preparing for, your Valentine's service project. If you will come back in here after devotional, then you'll be working on that. If you have any questions, please see Isabella. Nate said, don't text me, but he's told me that, so I won't text him, but you can text him. So, take that. We all know how to swap over the PowerPoint back there. Thank you, ma'am. All right, so continuing our conversations about practical apologetics, so make sure that your map is closed right now. We're going to do a little bit of review. I know this is going to take more time as we go along, but I just think it's a lot of fun, and it's the good way to keep this in mind. So as we start off, we're going to be out in the open country trying to create a conversation with people. And the way that we navigate from the open country into conversations, we got to cultivate some conversations. So what are some key questions that you can ask somebody if you're going to cultivate a conversation?
Where did everything come from?
All right, where did everything come from? What you got?
What are humans?
All right, what are humans? That one's going to be very important for our conversation tonight. What makes us all special? We're going to be able to talk about that. So where did everything come from? What are humans? What else?
What happens when we die?
All right, what happens when we die? We need to have an understanding of the afterlife. What else?
What's our purpose?
All right, what's our purpose? So once we understand what humans are, and then we want to figure out our purpose, and you can kind of navigate those depending on what's going on. So we're going to talk about the moral argument tonight, and it's going to give us some purpose, what we're supposed to be about, okay? And then what's the final question?
What is good?
All right, so what is good? All right, so once you cultivate a conversation, maybe you get backed into a corner a little bit, and I don't know why that animated, not going to go that route. Once you get backed into a corner, potentially, you then have the opportunity to be able to rein in the conversation or corral it back a little bit. What are some questions you can ask in proper order? All right, I think it's very important. If you're going to rein in or corral in a conversation, what questions would you ask?
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so there's three questions. I'm just kidding. All right, so you want to ask, what do you mean by that? I was talking to some of you guys. You got the experience to use these questions this morning, potentially, right? If you want to talk about that at some point. But so maybe somebody makes a claim or maybe an accusation, and you want to figure out, what do you mean? So maybe they say something like, who do you pray to? And you want to kind of know a little bit more about what's happening there. So the first question you ask is, what do you mean by that? Make them define their terms. What's the next question you ask?
How did you come to that?
All right, so how did you come to that conclusion? Is it based off of research, experience? Have you been reading your Bible? You've been talking to other people. You want to know how they got to that point? And then what's the third question?
Have you ever considered?
Have you ever considered you get to offer some counter evidence and be able to talk about some really neat and interesting things? Which is why in your roadmap you're going to make a decision. Are you going to go based off of cultivating a conversation, reining it in, where you're going to sit in the driver's seat? You then are going to decide, do I go to evidence for God or am I going to spend some time on evidence for Jesus? We'll finalize our evidence for the existence of God, just 3 arguments. We'll do that tonight, round out that discussion. And next week we'll start talking about evidence for Jesus. So we'll be able to take a detour down that way instead. But for the sake of our conversation at this time, you're going to go up and you're going to lay out some foundations for the existence of God. And there are 3 main arguments. We call them classical arguments. What did we cover? You can pick one or the other and decide which one to go to next. What are the classical arguments? What's one of them?
Cosmological.
All right, cosmological. All right, each argument is composed of 2 premises and a conclusion. What is the first premise of the cosmological argument?
Everything that has a beginning has been created.
All right, everything that has a beginning has a cause. All right, so there's a specific wording on that. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. What do you do on the first premise? What's your goal there?
Illustrate.
All right, you got to illustrate it. So how would you illustrate it? Everything that has a beginning has a cause. Maybe you use something common knowledge. And I think we keep coming back to the cookie illustration since you brought up the first premise. All right, so everything that has a beginning has a cause. That's the first premise of the cosmological argument. What's the second premise of it? The universe has not a cause, beginning. All right, so then we would want to show our evidence to know that the universe actually has a beginning to it. It hadn't just it had been running for eternity, because we've got the first and second laws of thermodynamics to teach us that. And scientists across the board, you count the heads and they'll tell you that we believe the universe has a beginning. All right, so the way that you do that, you prove the second premise, and then that takes you to the conclusion, which is what? All right, therefore it has a cause. And what is the purpose behind the conclusion of the cosmological argument? What do we do in the bottom? What do we learn from the conclusion of these arguments? There's a creator. All right, yeah, well, so we get something specifically about God. So what do you learn about God? Remember, if space, matter, and time had a beginning, then you have and personal, because he chose to make these things. So that's your cosmological argument. All right, number 2, what's the other argument? Teleological argument. All right, it's got two premises and a conclusion. Let's knock those out quickly. First premise.
Every design has a designer.
Every design has a designer, and you would want to illustrate that. So you can talk about buildings if you're going to be an architect, or if you can you talk about clothing, or you can talk about technology. So anything that has a design has a designer. The second premise is
The universe displays.
in tandem. Look, I like this. Surround sound. No, y'all keep going. The universe together has.
A staggering amount of design.
Look, he cheated, you didn't, all right? So he's looking at his mouth. The universe displays a staggering amount of design. So how would you prove that? What would you go to? Just out of curiosity. You don't have to go through all the evidence, but what would you talk about?
The bombardier beetle.
That's what I'm saying. You talk about the bombardier beetle, right? And where did he come from? All right, so irreducible complexity. You can't get any further down without having multiple times of him just go, all right? So you got to have the bombardier beetle. That's a good illustration. What's another way that you would prove that there's a staggering amount of design to the universe?
Like waves.
All right.
Away from the moon.
All right, yeah, so what we file that underneath is that the universe is just right for human life to exist. So if any of those parameters was changed, like the moon being further away, then the tides would be chaotic and we wouldn't be able to survive and all that kind of stuff. So what we call the Goldilocks universe. So you have Goldilocks universe, everything's just right for human life to exist. So you get to prove the second premise that the universe displays a staggering amount of design, which then takes you to the conclusion, which is?
The universe has a designer.
All right, therefore the universe has a designer. So that teaches us something about God, in that he is all-powerful, intelligent. So you have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal, intelligent, all-powerful, and I would even argue all-knowing being just based off of that. Now, I know that as we review this, because I want it to be well-traveled in your brain where you can have this conversation and know where to go. Not that you have all the facts. I'm not here to give you all the facts. We're just talking about practical conversations with somebody, which then takes us to our third classical argument. Once again, there are a lot of ways that you can prove or show that God really exists. This is just a third one that I think is really enjoyable, what we call the moral argument. And there's a lot of ways that you can formulate this. This is just going to be the one I use for tonight. A lot of different variations on it, but we're going to go for a simple route. So now you can have your handbook, you can have your handout for the night, you can have your map, you can open that back up, or if you're Cooper, you can just keep it open. But we have in the moral argument, we're going to give our two premises and a conclusion. All right, here's the first premise of the moral argument. And when we say moral, like everything else, there's a lot of different ways that you can prove this, but we're going to get to something very important here. All right, and so the first premise of the moral argument is that every law has a lawgiver. All right, so on the first premise, we illustrate. How would you illustrate every law has a lawgiver? Do we have anybody in here that's expertise on the law and you know how to hold people accountable to it? Anybody in here? Anybody know the law? Okay, we have a few lawyers convenient here. We also have some detectives. That's nice, a detective, right? So they have some insight on this, but every law has a lawgiver. So when you go outside and you look at the speed limit on Atlanta Highway, I didn't just go out there and put up the sign. I don't have the authority to do that, but somebody did. What's the speed limit on Atlanta Highway?
45.
All right, leaving Faulkner, how fast did you get here? 65. Okay, well, see, we got some honesty going on here. But just, you've got a law, and you know that has to come from somewhere. So if you've got a law, then you got to have a lawgiver, which means there's also authority behind it. So this is easy for us to illustrate because we live here in the United States. We've got our Constitution, and the Constitution is a very important law code, and we've got a lot of things that are backed behind that. You get intuitively, what does it mean when you have a law, you're going to have a lawgiver. Now, we're going to get to the second premise, which is the one that we're going to have to spend our time proving. There is a moral law. So the same way that we recognize that there are certain laws that exist in our country, you know, like driving on the right side of the road, driving a certain miles per hour, you know, all of those kind of things. We're going to make a claim that there is a moral law. Now, we've got to unpack that a little bit more because what does it mean that there's a moral law? Are we talking about that the earth that we live in and the country that we live in, that there are people who are somewhat good? Now, that would be the case. Like, we have people that are somewhat good. I think you're good people, right? And maybe there's people that are not in this building tonight, don't believe in Christianity, And they're good people. They give to the poor. They drive slower than you do, apparently. But, it's like there are good people that are not Christians, all right? Are we just talking about their law-abiding citizens, or is there something a little bit deeper? When we say that there is a moral law, it's more than just following the laws of the land, okay? Anybody can do that. Anybody can drive on the right side of the road and obey those rules. But is there something that, what we're going to argue, all humans know is right? And to the negative point, is there something that all humans know is wrong? Now, out of curiosity, when you think about things that all humans throughout time, doesn't matter your gender, doesn't matter your ethnicity, it doesn't matter your background, what are some things that all humans know that is a rule that we're supposed to follow? Certainly it's not driving on the right side of the road, because we have countries that drive on the other side of the road. Let's hold on to those thoughts for just a moment. But what's something we all know, whether good or bad? What would you say? All right, murder. All right, we all know that murder is wrong. Okay, you can't take an innocent person's life. You can't take that authority into your own hands. All right, so we've got that. What else? That's a good example. Stealing. All right, it's wrong to take something from somebody else, okay? Now, you may start coming up with some exceptions to those. You may think of some exceptions potentially, but that would be us trying to apply some things going on here. But we're talking about the rule that's there, and we have to work through that, but this is not an ethics class. This is just talking about morality. I think you're right, that all humans know it's wrong to steal, okay? What else? Lying. I think you're right that all humans know that it's wrong to lie. It's not beneficial, it's not helpful, and even kids from a young age, they know that it's wrong to lie. All right, what else would you say?
There's like honor in taking care of those who can't take care of themselves.
Okay, all right, I like that. Doing good to others, maybe to those that aren't able to have things for themselves, but just generally doing good to other people. In a general setting to anybody, you can fine-tune that a little bit more, is that we do good to those that we're close to, so our family and friends and our communities. And you narrow that down even more, and we do good to those that we're close to in our family, so like our parents and our children, right? But just the general idea, you do good to other people, okay? What else would you say that we all know? So we've got some positive things like don't murder, don't steal, don't lie, but then positive things like do good for other people, okay? Can you think of any other positive things that all humans should accept that we're supposed to do?
Just like generally respecting other people.
Okay. Yeah, showing respect to other people. I like that. What else?
Treat others that you want to be, how you want to be treated.
Okay. Yeah, so you got respect, treating people, showing kindness. Good. What else? Positive wise, what's something we all know that we want and desire? What would something be?
Honesty.
Okay, honesty. So it's like it's wrong to lie, but we prefer honesty, right? We want people to keep their promises or their vows. Isn't that important? Right? We base a lot of things on keeping our word with the honesty that goes along with it. What about this? That we all want justice. Right? That's very important. We want to be justified. We want justice to be done correctly around us. We want other people to recognize that. All of these things, and there's a lot that we can go through. There's a lot of negative things, but there's also a lot of positive things that universally, across the board, all humans are going to recognize. So when we say that there is a moral law, we're going to dive deeper into this, but when we say that there's a moral law, that's what we're saying. It's not that all morality, so be careful in your wording here, and let me explain this. We're not saying that all morality or all ethical decisions come from God. Now, in our biblical worldview, it's going to teach us, the Bible's going to teach us how to make good, right decisions. But we're not saying that the Bible's telling us to drive on the right side of the road. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain things, there are some objective moral principles that exist. That's a law. In the same way that a law has to have a lawgiver, if there is a moral law, then what is the conclusion of this argument? Every law has a lawgiver. There is a moral law. Therefore, Tommy's ready to go.
Moral lawgiver.
There is a moral lawgiver. There has to be somebody that's able to enforce the law, lay down the law, right? That's the important thing. So what is this going to teach us about God? Is that He is all good, and He's all knowing, powerful in order to make a law for everybody at the same time. I mean, we got countries trying to do that, right? We have political leaders trying to do things like that, and they can't they don't have enough authority to call out a law for everybody. But also, what about a timeless law? One that never changes, regardless of where you are, where you come from, who you are. It is the way that it is. We don't have enough power to enforce or to make something like that. But there is a moral lawgiver. Now, what's going to be rich about this, you may say, okay, well, Billy, this is really interesting. You're saying there's a moral lawgiver, but how do I know this is not like another God? Like, at least we're acknowledging there's a higher power, but what if it's another God? What if it's another higher being? How do we know it's the God of the Bible? We haven't even got that far yet. All that we're doing with our classical arguments is we're making a case for a supernatural being that is above us. Now, you take all those qualities, right? Is that he's the cause, he's the designer, he's the moral lawgiver, and you look at all of those things, and that gives us a pretty good profile of who this God is. Now, where our map's going to go is that we can also navigate from here. We can go and look at evidence for the Bible, and it's going to clarify because it's going to run in parallel tandem lines to what we know and recognize based off just the observation of things like classical arguments. There's so many other arguments, and you keep building up this portfolio of this being. And the scriptures come in and say, let me make sense of what you're experiencing in this life right now. All the things that you are recognizing, that is the God. Paul does that tactic, doesn't he? When Paul approaches somewhere like Lystra in Acts chapter 14 or Athens in Acts chapter 17, he connects the dots for people. He said, the one that you recognize that has the power to send the rains and the fruitful seasons, or the one that you acknowledge is the unknown God, he's the one that brought everything into being. See, Paul did that. He connected the dots for people. You're taking them down the roadmap. You're trying to get them to the destination. And so the Bible comes along and you give a fuller understanding, but you can also take our route, as we're going to be doing next week, after you cultivate a conversation, corral it in a little bit. You then take somebody down the path. Hey, let's talk about Jesus, all right? In order for Jesus to have X, Y, and Z, it's got to have a divine stamp of approval behind it, and that has its own line of logic as well and evidence. But you see what I'm saying here? Somebody may come in and they're going to say, well, how do I know which God? And we already have some criteria. This is what's fun. Is we already have some criteria to rule out some other gods, supposed gods. You can do this in the Bible, right? Where Paul and some of these other people, the prophets, do this on a regular basis. They say, all right, I want you to think about your God. So think about Baal and Asherah. Think about the God of the Greeks and the Romans. What do you think about their morality? If we know that there is a moral law, and all of us as humans recognize the importance of doing good and love and justice and all of the things that you guys are recognizing, when you think through the stories, the mythological stories of the Greeks and Romans, what do you think about their gods? Are they good, upright, moral people?
They need to be put in time out.
Do what?
They need to be put in time out.
They need to be put in time out. All right, so there you go. Like, they don't match our understanding of morality. And now what's fun is when we start assessing other gods. So even if you come along and assess the God of Islam, does he look like the God that we would understand based off of our design and our plan, all these things that we just know as humans? It's counterintuitive to that. There's a lot of other reasons to throw out that God as well, but you see, just based off of the moral law of what is good and right, when you look at the laws that are commanded by that God in Islam, you say that doesn't match. Now, you could probably also look down the road and say, well, hold on now. I've read my Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament seems pretty vindictive. He seems like he tells some people to do some things that doesn't quite sit right with me. So we're going to have to assess that. That's going to be one of the potholes that we're going to come across. But that's the same criteria. In order for us to assess which God, you got to have some kind of standard, some kind of way to judge him. And we have some tools already in our belt, which is going to help us to see this God for who he really is. So how do you go from the attributes of God based off the classical arguments to the God of the Bible? Well, you need to know and be able to compare them and look at them and see which one matches. But we're not quite there yet. Let's talk a little bit more about the moral law. So premise number 2 that we're trying to prove. In this building, I want you to envision it. This is where I've reworked some of these. My cosmological argument, just so you know, I've got to go back and do it. It's going to be a box factory. I decided that's how I'm going to illustrate a box factory. And there's going to be some fun things there. What we did with the teleological argument is that we had the science building. Well, what we're going to do tonight with the moral law is that I want you to think about a courthouse. Okay, so this building for the moral argument is going to be a courthouse. And you understand, you can already see the connection. When we talk about a law, our friends, a couple of them sitting here tonight that are lawyers, you're going to be able to connect with this and maybe fill in the gaps if I drop something on this. But I want you to think about what is involved if a court case was about to be in session. You've got the one who's on trial, you've got the judge, and you have the standard by which everything's going to be applied, right? Well, let's use those three criteria to help us understand what do we mean by proving that there is a moral law. You see, because if somebody were to fire back the tactical questions, the corralling questions to us of how'd you come to that conclusion, you say, well, let me talk about the person that's on trial, the standard, and the one who's going to judge. Okay, so you're in a courtroom right now, and I want us to narrow in a little bit, and I want you to think about just humans in general. All right, so you have recognized that there is some kind of moral standard, that we see that, lying is wrong, murder is wrong, and then you keep adding on from there. But there are also things that we gravitate toward that are good. But would you look across, just think about this, look across all of humanity, would you describe humans as good? We know these things, but would you describe us collectively as good? All right, you're hesitating on that. Many of you are shaking your head. Why?
If you look at what people do when they're around other people to get what they want, and I don't think you could really look at that and say that people are good.
Okay. All right, so we observe what people are doing and we think, well, you are kind of off, right? Collectively, we know what's right. Do you ever do something wrong? I mean, you read your Bible. You know what God expects of you. Have you ever lied? Have you ever lied after becoming a Christian? Okay. Now think about this. So if we're going to claim that there is a moral law and there's something that all humans should recognize, why don't we do it? What's going on here?
They don't care.
It's hard.
Okay. We don't care.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Doesn't benefit us.
Doesn't benefit us.
Self-righteousness.
Self-righteousness.
Pride.
Pride. I think that's huge. Go to Romans chapter 1. We visited this passage before, but I think it's important to make this point now. In Romans chapter 1, we get an idea of what is happening. If there is something that's good and right, now God's going to be the ultimate source of that, and He tells us some things, but if He designed us, as the Bible tells us in the book of Genesis, that we are designed in a very particular way. We are image bearers. And it seems to be, if we all know that there is a universal moral law, then the lawgiver put that into us, but then did He give us the ability to do it or not? That would seem kind of unfair that God would ask us to do something that we cannot do. So what's going on here? I don't think it's something that we can't do. It may be hard. It may be like our pride gets in the way. We might try and get ourselves off the hook, the self-righteousness mentality. But what's really at the heart of it? Let's look at Romans chapter 1, because what Paul does in the book of Romans, speaking to these Christians in the Roman Empire, the first 3 chapters he lays out the problem. Then he's going to get to the solution. Now, we're not going to read all 3 chapters to get to the problem, but I think you can make some connections here. All right, Romans chapter 1, I'm going to start in verse 18. All right, it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men." All right, so that's good. So we've got a judge. I'm going to connect this in a moment. But we've got a judge, and he's going to uphold the law, and he's going to hold the people who are on trial according to it. All right? They're ungodly, they're unrighteousness. But what is going on here? Who by their unrighteousness have done what? What's the issue? Suppressed the truth. Now, what I think of, if you get a basketball and you go and jump in the pool with it, and you press the basketball underneath the water, and you let your hands off of it, what's it going to do? It's going to hit you in the face. It's going to pop back up, right? If you try and suppress the basketball and get it down, you might do a good job keeping your head above water. It's like, I don't have a basketball, right? I didn't know that was wrong. And you step back, and it pops up, truth is going to prevail, right? I think a lot of times that's what's going on, is that how is it that we know that lying and stealing and murder and these things are bad, and that we should do good to more people and those that we're close to? Well, it might be we're trying to hold the basketball underneath the water. We're trying to suppress the truth. And so it's not that we don't know, it's that we choose to do something else. See, that's part of the human condition. It's not that we're created evil. So don't let somebody come in, and this is a part, we're reading our Bibles here, but don't let somebody come in and say, humans are just in and out, all the way through evil. No, we make bad decisions. Which doesn't that tell us something? If we know what is right, We choose to suppress what is right. Sounds a lot like we have free moral agency. So whoever this lawgiver is has designed us in such a way that we can know what's right. So we've got reasoning capabilities, all these things. We can know what is right, but we also have the ability to choose the right. We're not a bunch of robots running around where God just made us with no decisions. Could he have done that if he wanted to? Absolutely. He could make us a bunch of robots that just walk around going, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. But he didn't make us that way. He made us with all the rules that are in place, wants us to abide by them, but also says there's consequences if you don't. I've given you the option. You get to enjoy all the freedoms being here, and it's a great life to live. Nothing that God asks us to do is going to be bad. It's freeing in every way. Think through the verses that talk about that, right? But we actively choose to do otherwise. Now, what's going on? Well, Paul explains this, right? He continues on in verse 19. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. He has shown himself like the design component, like the cause component, but also the moral component. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have clearly been perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So we're without excuse. You know, one of the things that's been made, we look at the universe and it's been made. We look at the bombardier beetle and the platypus and the moon in place, and it's like God designed all of those things, but then we also have to do what? We look inside and see God made us. We, the same way that the rocks cry out, the stars cry out, we say something as well. We say a lot about who this being is. Now, of course, the Bible tells us we're made in the image of God. That's why, so we can recognize him and know who he is. But if we all recognize there is a moral law, and that moral lawgiver has enough power and ability to assign that to us and hold us accountable to it, and we know he holds us accountable because we feel guilty when we do what's bad. We feel guilty for holding the basketball underneath the water. Here's why we can know that. Now, the argument continues on, but I just want to jump for a second into chapter 2. Look at verse 12. I'm in Romans chapter 2, verse 12. All right, here's what Paul continues to say. Remember, the first 3 chapters are all about laying out the issue. He says this, for all who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law. Of course, he's talking to an audience that knows the law of Moses, right? There's some connections there. But he's about to universalize a law. He says, all right, for all have sinned without the law will also perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. So, if you know the law of Moses, you're going to be judged by the law of Moses. If you don't have the law of Moses, you're not going to be judged by the law of Moses. Okay? I can track with this. What's going on? Verse 13. For it's not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. For when Gentiles, the non-Jews, who don't have the law, by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they don't have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them on that day when, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus. Do you see what Paul just said? He's like, yes, all right. So if a Jew is going to be a Jew, he's going to have to follow underneath a Jewish standard. Well, what if you got somebody that's not a Jew? But do you see how he universalizes something here? He says, it's not those who hear the law that are righteous. It's the ones that what? Do. How is it that you can have a Jew who hears the law and does it, he's righteous, and then you have a Gentile who does not have the law but does the law? How are they the same? What do you think he's talking about here?
They're both doing like the outcome.
Okay.
Like when you have the law, like you do what it says.
All right. What would that look like? Let's work through that a little bit. If he's saying that you got a Jew and a non-Jew, and they both do the law, what are they doing?
Providing good fruit.
All right. Providing good fruit. All right.
What they were designed to do.
They're designed to do.
Using objective morality and law.
Sure. Yeah. Using objective morality.
What's morally right?
What's morally right. All right. All right. Let's think about it in this way. If you were to distill down, all right, so let's talk to our Jews over here. If you were to distill down, you are not the Jews, but I'm thinking of them over here. That if you were to distill down the law of Moses, all of it in its entirety, all 613 commandments into, I don't know, like 1 or 2 commandments, what would you narrow it down into?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength.
All right, and
Love your neighbor as yourself.
I like those 2. That seems like that's a pretty good paring down of the law, right? So, do you think that a Gentile, so think through our cases, we've talked about Acts 14 with Paul in Lystra and Acts chapter 17 with Paul in Athens. Were they trying to understand the creator of heaven and earth? I mean, Paul very basically was doing that. He's like, look around at the stars, look around at the rain, and look at the gods that he's like, you're striving for a God. You're trying to find him. And in fact, that's exactly what Paul says in Acts chapter 17. He says, you are looking for this God, and you're trying to make meaning of life as well and understand who we are, and you're groping and striving so that you can discover who he is. But also, just think about it generally, when you're saying to love your neighbor as yourself, what are some things that we've said? Like, hey, it's good for us not to murder somebody, not to steal, to seek justice, to watch after our parents, That sounds a lot like maybe some 10 Commandments, right? We've got some of those principles in there. Some of the objective morality is just built into God's commands. But then he builds on top of that too. A lot of the commands in the Old Testament, if you think through them, you got the one that's like, don't murder, okay? But then, to love your neighbor as yourself, which is why he then says, okay, let's talk about how you build your house. If you're going to build a house, why don't you put a fence around the top so your neighbor doesn't fall off? You got any oxen? You got a bull? You don't want him to get out and gore somebody? Why don't you build a fence so he doesn't do that? That sounds a lot like loving your neighbor. It's almost like God had to spell it out for him. It's like, okay, in order for you to know how to love your neighbor, let me give you some rules. So for the Jews, he said, all right, these are going to be the laws. The law is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Let me just spell it out for you, just so you don't miss anything at all. Build your house in this way. Offer these sacrifices. Do this, do this, do this. He gives them rules for that to uphold that. And when you get to the New Testament, you get the same thing, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And he's going to say, this is how you do that. He lays it out. He gives us the example in Jesus. And he tells us how to do good to other people. You got the teachings of Jesus with the Good Samaritan and all of those things. But also God can come in. He's like, all right, you want to be one of my people? You want to follow underneath my law? Which he said there's the universal law everybody's got to apply to. But then you're going to say, we want to be underneath your law specifically, God. He's like, okay, then if I give you a commandment, then that's what you're going to do. If I tell you where to sing, if I tell you where to worship, if I tell you how to reach salvation, here are the conditions. You follow them. See, the Bible gives us an explanation. So those cultivating questions, what are humans and what's our purpose? We're all trying to figure out and strive and to know who is this God, who's the cause, who's the designer, who's all good. How do I relate to him? I want to know that God. Paul said in Romans chapter 2, he says, let me tell you that feeling that you've got where you're pursuing and you're trying to do what the law says and what the law requires, whether you really know it or not. He said, that way when he comes and preaches the gospel, that was it. It connected all the dots for him, right? And that's what happens in those first 3 chapters of Romans. He's laying out the case for them. He's like, that's why the Bible makes sense. It's because what you notice about the objective moral standards has got to come from somewhere, and that all humans are obeying a law that is outside of us. It's got to come from above us. It can't be within us. I want to know more about who that lawgiver is. See, Paul uses this tactic. The Bible is filled with examples like this. So I think minimally when you're in the courthouse and you're looking at the one that's on trial, and even though somebody may come in and say, well, all right, why aren't all humans nicer? Why, if there is a law, why aren't people doing it? Clearly it didn't stop you. Just because there's a law on Atlanta Highway, that didn't quite make you into a good citizen, did it? You had the potential to, but you chose otherwise. Same way, God has given us the law. He's laid it out. And we look at humans and how we're designed, and we decide, what does that tell us? Now, next to that, of course, and this is just in different ways. You've got the law itself. So you look at the recognition of who we are as humans, that we have a moral conscience. We have an ability to know what is right and wrong. Because if it's universal, that means all people can come to that conclusion. But think through the law itself a little bit more. That we're saying that it is universal. All people throughout time, regardless of their demographics, can know these things. So you get a little bit about the humans, but I want to know more about the expectation. And why do people have different views of morality, though, right? I mean, we're saying that, all right, yeah, we should know there's murder and lying and all those kind of things, but Then you also have groups that have been cannibals. Like, all right, we're not just talking about going, like 5 miles over a speed limit. It's like you're on the wrong side of the road driving really fast in a dump truck. Like, what is going on here? You have completely decided something different. So how is it you say that there's supposed to be a moral law, but then you've got people that have done some really horrendous things, like killing millions of Jews, committing murder on a daily basis with abortion. You've got people that do some really horrendous things sexually to other people. I mean, you look at this kind of stuff, it's like, how can this go on? Like, we should know better. So what's going on? Well, we already said people are suppressing the truth, but that's not just suppressing the truth. That's going above and beyond. So what's happening here? Why is there such an issue in the world with us as humans? Is there a problem with the law? I thought that everybody was supposed to know this. We've got a conscience. But why do people act this way? And this is why it's important for our conversation. I'm making this a practical point. Is once you show that there's something about us as humans, you can actually use those extreme cases as a way to get somebody's attention, for them to think a little bit deeper about why these things are the way that they are. So I want you to think for a moment about the law. How can we know that there are some things that are just objective? Now, maybe you need a teaching on what is objective versus subjective. So when you think about objective, I want you to think about an object, okay? So it could be this podium, it could be a chair. It is solid, okay? It has dimensions to it. It has things that it is made of. A chair like this, it's got plastic. The seat cushion's probably 16 inches off the ground. You got the depth, you got the fabric, all this kind of stuff. If I were to take this chair and transport it somewhere else, it's still going to remain the same chair. Okay? If I take it over to the Middle East, it's still going to be this chair. If I take it over to China, it's going to be the same chair. So something is objective. It is the way that it is. Subjective is we got an opinion about it, right? That's an ugly chair. I don't like that chair. It's uncomfortable. That is me as the subject having an opinion about this. Well, when we're saying that there are objective moral laws, we're saying that there are certain things that are in place that are more like that chair versus my opinion about how I feel about things. But our world wants to say that you get to decide your own morality. The law is what I think. So if I want it to be good to steal, then I can choose that. If you don't like stealing, then don't steal. If I don't like abortion, then I'm not going to encourage abortion. But if you want to have an abortion, you have an abortion. Right? That's what our world is saying, but we don't actually believe that, because you plug in other social things and we get very upset very quickly. So if somebody had the opinion, you just choose your morality if you want to do whatever you want. Take something, and this is a hot button issue, and it relates perfectly well for where we are in Montgomery, Alabama, is what if somebody said, you know what, racial discrimination is fine. What would you think about somebody that said that? You wouldn't say you get to choose your own morality, so if you don't like racial discrimination, then you avoid it. If you like racial discrimination, then you do it. What about something like slavery? I think something more, reprehensible, something like rape. I mean, you put those things in there, and you realize, no, you can't say that you decide your own morality, you choose your own truth. That's eventually going to break down, right? It's not practical. It doesn't make sense. So why is the world doing all of these things? They're trying to choose their own morality, but they're suppressing the truth. But we use that as an example. It's like, it's not that, I just don't like that. I don't like that chair, so I have a preference against it. No, it's like, no, you're doing something really wrong. Like, you've gone against the standard of what you're supposed to be as a human, but you've broken some kind of law that is way bigger than us. Which is why you have people like a moral reformer, like a Martin Luther King Jr., who comes in and he says, you are depriving people of human dignity in the way that you treat them. And that's across the board. Or maybe, we look through the things that happened during the Holocaust with the killing off of all of the Jews, and we look at that, and when the German soldiers were put on trial during the Nuremberg trials, we said that they committed crimes against what? Humanity. Universally across the board. Well, how were they being judged? By a law that is above us. It wasn't just like, hey, you broke German law. There's like, we were following orders, we were doing German law. No, you did something against humanity across the board, and it doesn't matter what language you're in. It doesn't matter what religion you're in. These are things that we all know that there is a law that is above us. So the way that we're designed as humans, we recognize things in the way that we act, in the way that we function, but then we also appeal. There's something that we're universalizing over people. in the sense of we argue about these moral things a lot more vehemently than a personal preference over a chair. What you think about human dignity and things like abortion and the protection of innocent life, you argue a lot more passionately than subjectively. So you got these things, human nature and how we are, and that there's a law that is above us that we are appealing to, which then takes us to this judge. There is a judge that is going to make things right. This is what I mean by it. With all these things that are going on, we start asking the question, when will justice be done? We all want justice, right? I mean, that's the thing. You want justice to be done. We want a just system. We want just law. We want, all of these things. But when there are these major things that are going on, we as humans universally across the board say, when is this going to be put right? And that's where you've got a judge that, one, can hold people accountable, as we just read in Romans chapter 1, but also who can make things right. That doesn't mean right now he's going to make things right. All right, so be aware, I want it to be done right now. Those people need to be punished right now. They live one more day, they should be punished. But we realize this, there's going to be a day where we stand before a judge. And what's going to happen? Every book, every action, every deed, every thought is going to be laid open before the one who knows everything. And he's going to judge the secrets, the thoughts, and the intentions of men's hearts. See, I'm not able to do that. You can see somebody that looks really good, but inwardly they may be really bad. They make you think about a conversation Jesus had with the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23. You look like a whitewashed tomb, but on the inside you're full of dead men's bones. You wash the outside of the cup, but on the inside you hadn't done anything at all. See, God is able to see the inside and the outside. And we know this, and I think it's another thing across the board intuitively. For us to understand justice, we know there has to be one who can exact justice. And this is what's fun when you look at Romans chapter 3, that other component of this. And we're familiar with Romans 3, verse 23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But what do you get in verses 24 through 26? Somebody go there real quick before the bell rings. Romans chapter 3, 24 through 26. Still got to read it, although the bell rang. We're pulling a Nate.
Being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood, through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed, to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus.
That's the key, is that God will be just. He put a law into place. He made us to be able to recognize it. But you know what he's also able to do? He is just, and he is what? The justifier. He can put us in right standing. So although we've done some pretty horrible things, collectively as humanity, independently as a human, God can make it right. As in, he sent his son as a propitiation. If we will understand who the son is. Do you see where the conversation goes? Where the roadmap's going to go? If we focus on Jesus, we're going to get a solution to make up for all the issues that we've got going on. So that's where we're going to pick up next week. We'll talk about evidence for Jesus. So appreciate you guys.